After replaying this game for the first time in 2 or 3 years, I was surprised at how different my vision of this game ended up being by the end of it. When people talk about the glory days or the golden age of Atlas games, they tend to refer to the PS2 era, consisting of Nocturne and DDS 1 and 2 and also the Raidou duology. Sometimes people consider Persona 3 and 4 to be a part of this era, but they've been remastered and reworked a few times each, so I feel like they've transcended the PS2 era since they're both still relevant and both just got a brand new physical release announced. I always felt like the more Atlas progressed into their arguably as prominent 3DS era, they lost a bit of their original magic that they previously had around the DDS era. It could have been a change of visual style with Masayuki Doi making the vast majority of new character art for the mainline series, along with Shigenori Soejima's art style changing to something that's, I feel at least, less unique. Both Doi and Soejima, in my opinion, have a more consistent track record of great art compared to Kaneko, but that's besides the point, and also my own opinion. This game came out in 2008 for the PS2, which to me is crazy because the jump from PS2 to PS3 was pretty huge. It's hard to believe that this came out in the same year as like Metal Gear Solid 4. This game really feels like it's way older than it actually is, and it reuses so many assets from the first game and left me feeling like sometimes I wasn't even playing a sequel, more so like an FES or a royal version of Raidou 1, which caused me to unfortunately lose interest in the story much earlier than I would have liked, since it felt like I was playing towards the end of a 60-hour game instead of a duology of 30-hour long games. This is sort of where Persona started to have a bigger influence on Shin Megami Tensei as a whole. Even looking at the box arts for these two games, you can tell that the second game's art was made much more palatable for a mainstream audience. Even throughout the story, there's brief but weirdly important scenes that involve picking a hypothetical love interest, which really felt like it was ripped straight from something like Persona 4 because of how weird and out of place it felt.
What?
The music felt like it took a bit of a hit as well from the first game, because it reused most of the music from Raidou 1. Raidou 2 boasts a much less extensive list of original songs, and the list is made even shorter if you don't count remixes. The songs in this game sound a lot like the ones from Persona 3, and even more so 4. The same guitar tone, the same trumpets that get really annoying after a while, etc. People say that Shoji Meguro got really burned out because of the constant pressure to make new music for a new Megaten/Persona game, like literally every year. So at this point, a lot of new songs blend together after DDS, which even he claims to be his most creative work. Besides the art and the music, the gameplay is really solid for the most part, since it's building off the bones of the last game, which in itself was a little too simple for my liking. Now Raidou can roll and use special moves, ammo is now infinite, which is nice, but I rarely find myself using it, even with the elemental bullet spells, which brings me to my next point. This game has a lot of mechanics that go pretty much unused because you just don't need to use them. I bet most players didn't even know that blocking and tapping X right in front of an enemy would roll you right behind them like in Wind Waker, but I'm pretty sure they never explain it to you in game, and if they do, you won't ever need to use it other than to feel cool. For the latter half of the game, you'll be so good on Mag, the primary mana resource of this game, that you'll be able to spam super high level piercing spells that hit more than once to obliterate pretty much anything. Keep in mind that in my playthrough, I only ever did 2 of the optional side quests and grinded only once for a super long fusion chain late game towards the 25-hour mark. The game is way too easy for me, and I'm glad they added a hard mode in the form of King difficulty, since it's something that me and my friends really wish they would have added to DDS since it's absent mysteriously exclusively in those 2 games. The only part of the main story that I found difficult were the Fiends. Some may say that they're side content, but they can literally interrupt the main story of the game whenever the moon phase hits new and force you into a fight with them, sorta like the riders from Nocturne camping outside the terminals. Fighting the Fiends requires a moderate level of strategy and good magnetite management to make sure you don't waste any by missing, since the riders like to teleport a lot. In my playthrough, I was able to kill every Fiend, including the Raidou clone a few times, since he can respawn unlike the others that stay dead for the remainder of the chapter. This game follows the SMT trope of having your decisions make an impact on your moral alignment and by extension the ending of the game. While the 3 main endings in the game are for the most part pretty similar minus the death of one character changing to another dependent on the route, I ended up getting the neutral ending, which is pretty cool since I usually only get Law or Chaos in other games, or TDE and Nocturne since it's the most fun. Overall, the gameplay loop of Raidou 2 isn't as fun as something like Nocturne, with the more prominent emphasis on Demon Fusion and the Kappas in that game, or DDS and the mantras and expanding your skill tree. I maybe went through 3 or 4 party cycles in Raidou 2, each consisting of 2 demons each, and never once felt like I needed to fuse to power myself up. It was just to explore the compendium and see more of the niche devil summoner demons you don't see too often in mainline. I actually saw some demons in this playthrough that I'd never seen before in my life, which was super cool. My one problem with the demons is that the ones that are probably the most optimal to use can be found as wild demons in the current or next major area, which makes them feel less unique, and also makes the compendium feel a bit smaller. Speaking of gameplay loop, the dungeons are probably some of the most forgettable in the series. I've played this game twice now and still couldn't recall a single name of any dungeon despite reading a guide while playing, which I must say isn't always necessary. It also doesn't really help that the dungeons are interspersed between probably the driest dialogue from the driest characters introduced in a Mega 10 game, worse than the Reason characters in Nocturne. Nagi and Garen are both that trope where the characters say a certain thing over and over, like how Teddy P4 always makes a bear pun. Nagi and Garen both say bounds of my conjecture or in theory in almost every second sentence without fail. It's done okay this time, because Teddy P4, to be honest, was more of a comic relief character for the most part, but I can't really feel bad for these young Sheldon-sounding-ass characters when either one of them is going through it. The one character that I can say I really enjoyed watching was Narumi. He was my favorite character in 1 and probably still is in 2. Another big problem with the dialogue is that none of it is voice acted, which is okay I guess considering this game is probably a lower budget title, but this game is practically begging for a Nocturne HD treatment. Digital Devil Saga 1 and 2 were somehow lucky enough to get okay voice acting 4 years before, and considering how that game performed, I'm assuming they didn't want to risk it again, which is understandable. It's just that this game has lots of scenes where stuff is being explained to you over these ugly looking 3D models that bob up and down and express like one of 4 emotions. I know it probably sounds like I am hardcore shitting on this game, but I just think that this and the Raidou world and characters are so slept on. The whole way through this game, I couldn't help but think how great this game would have been had it released on Xbox 360 or PS3. Catherine and Persona 5 both had a release this generation, and they did really well in sales, I'm pretty sure. Granted, Catherine is like the biggest clickbait of the video game world, but it's still worth mentioning. You know, seeing the ever mediocre Persona 5 Strikers get the Mega 10 action game of the decade release really upsets me now that I can imagine a world where Raidou or even just the SMT franchise got it instead. Raidou being able to run around a fully 3D environment instead of those 240p pre-rendered backgrounds at full 60 FPS with a proper skill tree and great boss fights would have easily cemented Devil Summoner as a pillar title for Atlas, but instead they had to completely and utterly ruin their chance with the embarrassingly lame Soul Hackers 2. This game set out to create an action game out of the PS2 Mega 10, and I think when you look at it that way, it definitely succeeded, since both the bad and the good got carried over from mostly Nocturne and Digital Devil Saga, and even a little bit here and there from Persona 3 and 4. Raidou's probably one of the more interesting Mega 10 protagonists, and the lore behind the Kuzunoha family is really interesting, especially after having played Soul Hackers and Persona 2 a few years back. You can see how it all ties together. This game is definitely more polished than Raidou 1, and overall a better game that improves on most of what Raidou 1 needed to fix, like having only one demon out at a time. But for me, it doesn't quite hit the mark that DDS did, and I'm not remotely satisfied with the dormant status of this series/character, and I'm so extremely confused at how Atlas was moving in the right direction for the most part, but completely dropped the ball on this guy. If it were on 10, I'd probably give it a really solid 7. Maybe I'm biased because I love Raidou and I love Mega 10, but I genuinely enjoyed this game start to finish. It just doesn't help that it was bogged down so hard by the previous gen specs, since it had just been given more time to break free from the mediocrity of its predecessor and define itself as a true successor. I could easily see Raidou 2 as a 10 out of 10 action RPG in another life on PS3.
21